Ahí me escucha la gente, ¿cierto? Hello, everyone. We still see people connecting. So we're in 152 and some people are still arriving. So we're gonna wait one more minute for me to introduce Professor Angrist. Thank you for waiting.
How long should I talk for, Juan? 30, 35?
So this has been scheduled for an hour, and I guess if we allow at the end for 15 or 20, should be enough. And also, I mean, it also depends on what time what time you have to leave, Josh. We don't want to abuse your time, but probably there's going to be a lot of interest and questions. So
yeah, I'm happy to take questions, but what time is it in Colombia?
Right now it's 3:35 in Colombia.
Yeah, I'd like to finish up by 5:30 ET.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I guess 40 minutes, you can talk for 4 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just for the people who are here as panelists, Carlo, Andrea, Josh asked me for people to put their cameras on because he wants to see the faces. So please, if you can do that, that would be great.
Thank you. You guys are my audience, you know. As Zoom teachers, we learned that we have to have our students put their video on.
That's been the challenge.
Well, I take attendance, and if your video is off, it's like, you know, you're not there.
Okay.
But now we're back in physical classrooms, but during the Zoom interlude. Are you guys back to teaching normally?
We are hybrid right now, but we expect to go back to normality next semester. So starting at the beginning of 2022. Okay, should we start? I think we can start right now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the closure of this conference. It's been a great 3 days with a lot of people participating throughout. Very nice sessions, contributed, invited, plenary sessions. It's been amazing, and we're very happy with the results of the conference. And just to end the conference on the highest note, we have this plenary session by Professor Josh Angrist. So I have the pleasure and the honor of being the chair of the session. My name is Juan Vargas. I'm the conference organizer, but more than that, I had also the honor of being Josh's student back in 2005 when I was visiting Harvard and MIT, and I took his graduate course on applied econometrics, and it was a really interesting experience that shaped the way I think about research, think about causal questions, and do research. So in fact, I never thought, this is going to sound a little bit silly, but I never thought that George was going to earn a Nobel Prize one day. In fact, he says that I called it because we actually interviewed him for a local economics journal called La República. We interviewed him 2 days before October the 11th, and we actually insisted in asking him how expectant he was to receive a call next Monday, but he was very pessimistic about it. Now we have the honor of having ending this conference with a Nobel laureate. I am actually chairing this session because I chose to before the news. So it's not that I'm doing this exposed. So Professor Angrist is full professor of economics at MIT. And he needs no introduction other than that. I'm pretty sure that Professor Angrist's work, extensive work on causal inference and applied economics. He's one of the fathers, really, of many non-experimental methodologies to estimate causal effects, and in fact, this has been recognized by the Nobel Prize Committee this year. So without further ado, and with all honor, I just give the floor to Josh for his presentation. You're extremely welcome, and we're very happy and thrilled to have you here, Josh.
Well, thanks very much, Juan, for that flattering introduction. It's great to reconnect with you, and I'm honored to be able to close out LaSea this year. And I know you didn't invite me just because of the prize, because we talked about this long ago. And I'm also impressed that you called the prize. So I think I should ask you about other things in my life, that I'm uncertain about, but we can talk about that later. Let me see if I can get the screen share to work for my slides here. You guys see those? One, give me a thumbs up if you see the slides. Yeah, okay, good. So I know it's late Friday afternoon. It's Friday afternoon in Bogota as well as in Boston. So I'll give a brief talk, maybe 35 minutes or so, and leave some time for questions, though feel free to interrupt with questions as well. This paper is part of a long-running project with my collaborators at the Blueprint Labs at MIT, a lab dedicated to education research, human capital, and now we're expanding to health and other domains. The project is joint work with David Otter, my colleague here, and our former student Mandy Palace at Harvard. The agenda here is an investigation using a randomized trial of the effects of post-secondary financial aid. I know I don't have to motivate that for a Latin American audience. There's a lot of interest and discussion of the effects of college financing and how that should be done and who should be getting the aid and where the most bang for buck is likely to be. So we had the opportunity to work with the Buffett Foundation based in Nebraska. They have a long-running, it's a private foundation, but they're very, very large in the financial aid sphere. They have a long-running program called the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation Scholars Program. It distributes $40 million to over 4,000 public college students annually. They actually fund about 11% of the University of Nebraska, or all Nebraska, I should say, public campus first-year enrollment. So they're very big players there, and they came to us quite a while ago. It's hard to believe. In 2011, they approached our team with an interest in having us study the program. And we proposed a randomized trial, and they signed up for that. So, of course, we were very excited to be able to study such an important financial aid program. I'm going to introduce some acronyms and some structure about the program because this features in our analysis. The way the program works is people apply for money. There's a lot of outreach to high school seniors, and the seniors identify when they apply for the money. It's sort of like applying for FAFSA. There's forms, they're simpler than the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the free application for federal financial aid that almost all American college students do. Part of the Buffett application, students identify a target campus. It might be, for example, a University of Nebraska campus. And I have to give you the acronyms there because I'm going to use them throughout the talk. University of Nebraska is called somewhat counterintuitively NU, and then it has its campuses, and they go by the acronyms UNL for Lincoln, UNO for Omaha, and UNK for Kearney. An interesting feature of the NU campuses, so this is like the big state university, like the University of Massachusetts or the University of California. The University of Nebraska campuses, that is the NU campuses, the Buffett scholars that enroll there also participate in a post-secondary support intervention that's called learning communities. And that's a widely used support strategy, especially for students who are first-generation college students, to help them succeed. We were interested in identifying and distinguishing the effects of financial aid alone from the effects of the combined package of support services and aid. So the research strategy that I'm describing today also has a second treatment that has a different name. It's not called Buffett Scholars Program. It's called the College Opportunity Scholarship. And that's for students who end up at NU and they don't get enrolled in the learning communities. So we can use the difference in those two treatments to learn about the marginal effect of the learning community support. Who can qualify for this aid? So there's an application. The eligibility rules are that you have to be a Nebraska resident high school senior or graduated from a Nebraska high school. You have to have a decent GPA of 2.5, and you have to have an expected family contribution as determined on the FAFSA, which is this financial aid form, of less than $10,000. 1 year was a little higher. So that means, these are lower income families. The low EFC means that that's a low income family. Then the foundation evaluates the applications. Broadly speaking, they look at applicants both as a function of, they rate applicants both as a function of merit, academic potential, and need. The merit criteria are similar to state financial aid programs that target, reasonably successful high school students, but not the elite. The leading example of that, the pioneering example, was a program in Georgia called the Georgia Hope Scholarship. My home state of Massachusetts has something called the Adams Scholarship. There are many, many state programs, and we see the Buffett program as kind of a version of maybe a more generous version of programs like that. The Buffett program is indeed exceedingly generous. It covers tuition, all tuition and fees, any federally recognized cost of attendance. So the American federal government has for each school an official cost of attending that school. If you're funded through this program, you have no costs, and it's renewable for up to 5 years if you're at a BA program and up to 3 years if you're at a community college program, conditional on a minimal GPA cutoff. So it is more generous than most state aid. Now, we got involved with the foundation. The foundation is running this program, and they don't want to stop the program and say, oh, now let's do some research. So the program had to be ongoing. So we had to find a way to kind of insert the experiment inside the ongoing program. So we did what we call a bubble randomization. So this is an example of that. Applicants are given a score, and the lowest scoring applicants are not offered scholarships with certainty. The highest scoring applicants are offered scholarships with certainty. And then there's a group, and that's highlighted here in yellow, that's the bubble group. And inside that group, we randomly offer scholarships to some. And it's not simple random assignment, it's stratified. So there are some fairly complicated strata involved here because we want to have power to learn about effects for different types of students. So I want to review this with you because it features in the analysis to come, the stratification scheme. Applicants report a target campus. They're identified as either targeting 4-year schools or 2-year schools. The 2-year schools are community colleges. Their acronyms are listed there. It's not very important what they're called today. And then this bubble thing happens for those folks. Top scorers funded, low scorers not funded, and in the bubble, RCT, okay? So that's the 2-year strata, and that's how I describe it. And then we have the 4-year strata, and that's the focus of my talk today. I won't have much to say about the 2-year strata because our time is limited. Within the 4-year target campuses, these are bachelor's degree programs, there's really 2 types of schools. There's the University of Nebraska, so that's sort of like the University of California, somewhat more selective campuses. And then there are state colleges. There are state colleges in California as well, so you may be familiar with that system. It's a very large system and well known to academics. Then within the strata that are defined by University of Nebraska are state colleges. For state colleges, there's bubble randomization and there's regular STBF scholarship or control in the bubble. And here for NU, it's a little more complicated. There's always awarded, not awarded in bubble, but the bubble has potentially two treatments. One is the STBF scholarship, which includes the learning communities. One is the COS scholarship, which is financial aid only. And then there's controls. So we can use that to look for a differential impact on the margin of being offered or not offered the learning community intervention as well as financial aid. Okay, so we have a lot of data to facilitate the analysis. We get rich information from STBF applications that includes things like high school transcripts, ACT scores. This is the Midwest, so students take the ACT instead of the SAT. We get the FAFSA student aid reports, so that gives us a lot of information about applicant families and finances. There's a survey of college plans, and there's additional different demographic info from the Nebraska Department of Motor Vehicles, and then the outcomes. Of course, that's very important. Some of the outcome data comes from colleges, Nebraska's public schools, public colleges and universities, and some comes from a wonderful database called the National Student Clearinghouse, which has data on enrollment, college major, and degrees earned from most American post-secondary schools. So we do some linkage there and put that all together, and I won't spend any time on those details. They're in our paper, which is an NBR working paper, and also on the Blueprint Lab site. So what I'm going to talk about today is just initially some reduced form offer effects, so the effect of getting offered financial aid, and then break it down by subgroup. There's some surprising subgroup stories that I want to show you. And then I want to explain the pattern of subgroup effects. And we have a kind of a hypothesis about why different groups benefited more. And you'll see there's dramatic differences between subgroups. Some groups are really helped to finish college by the aid, and others seem unaffected. Our explanation of that is that the aid primarily operates by allowing students to complete the first year of a 4-year degree program successfully. That is, to complete all the credits needed to be in good standing and then to progress on from there. And that outside of that early engagement channel, there isn't really a direct effect of aid. Okay, and then if there's time, we'll look at some cost-benefit analysis. There may not be time today for that. So here's some statistics on the population we're studying. Okay, the non-experimental sample here, the non-experimental sample, those are the people that are either guaranteed awards or not given awards. They're not subject to random assignment. And then we have the experimental sample. The experimental sample, those are the people in the bubble. So there's 8,190 people in the bubble, and that's across 5 applicant cohorts, 5 years of applicants that were randomized. And then other interesting data here, for example, about half male, half female. Nebraska sort of stereotyped as a white farm state, but there are a lot of minorities. In particular, the eligible sample is 21% Hispanic and 6% Black or African American, 5% Asian. So there's a substantial non-white population in our applicant group, and we'll take advantage of that to look at subgroup effects by race. The analysis framework is initially quite straightforward. It gets a little more elaborate as we go. So we're not worrying about take-up. You could, in principle, and we did this in a paper, Michael Kramer and Eric Bettinger and I, a paper on school vouchers in Columbia. We used offered a voucher as an instrument for using a voucher. We're not worrying about that here. The take-up rate is very high. 93% of the people offered aid use it, and it doesn't change much across cohorts or strata. So the basic analysis framework is an offer dummy, AI, your offered aid. There's some controls. Those are most importantly dummies for the strata. And the strata are your target college. What is the identity of the campus that you said you wanted to go to if you got the aid? It's not that everybody, it's not actually a commitment. So if you said you wanted to go to NU, nobody forces you to go to NU, but people mostly go where they said they wanted to go when they get the awards. So it is a very highly predictive distinction, and the randomization probabilities do differ across strata, so it's essential to control for strata in the econometric analysis. We have degree outcomes for cohorts from 2012, 13, and 14. At the time the paper was written, we did not yet have data for the last two cohorts. And we also have only two of these cohorts out of three were subject to potentially being awarded the COS, that is the award without learning communities. So let me now turn to the four-year strata, and that's what I'll talk about exclusively today. I think. So here is some information about financial aid and how the award affects students' financial aid packages. You could think of this as a first stage where the mediating variable in an instrumental variables framework was the amount of money. Here is the average amount on year one. So you're a freshman, first year student, you know, in the treated group, controls get no Buffett aid. Treated get about $8,000, and that boosts financial aid packages. So the way to read this graph is darker blue is treatment, gray is control, and then there's a treatment effect confidence band on top of the treated bar. Now we'll see those are very narrow here, but later they'll get wider. So one thing you might notice is college aid does not increase dollar for dollar with aid awarded. So this gap here is smaller than this, and that's because some of what the students do, the recipients, is they substitute grant aid for loans. So they take fewer loans, okay? So they're not really completing the aid package dollar for dollar with the amount awarded, and they're free to do that, of course, but the grant aid basically goes up one for one. So there's the differential grant aid, money they don't have to pay back, and that's about equal to the Buffett money, which is not a foregone conclusion because there's other grant aid and there could have been some offset or clawback. For example, it might have been the case, though the Buffett Foundation tries to make sure this doesn't happen, that institutional aid would be reduced when you get an award. That's sort of like if you think about our PhD programs, which many of you have experienced on the panel, if you get a National Science Foundation grant, you know, we reduce the amount of money that we give you as a PhD student to take advantage of that. So that doesn't actually happen in this program. Okay, so here's the first set of results. These are effects on initial college choice. So this population, you know, these are high school seniors who are doing reasonably well, and they've gone to the trouble to complete a FAFSA, and they've gone to the trouble to apply to the Buffett Foundation for aid. So most of them go to college, at least they start college. So the control mean college enrollment rate is 96. That doesn't leave a lot of headroom for a treatment effect. There is a small treatment effect of 2.6 percentage points on initial enrollment. But what you do see is students are shifted into four-year programs. So award recipient four-year enrollment goes up by 11 points, and that's partly on account of a reduction of two-year enrollment. So the two-year enrollment rate falls by 6.7, and this is in four-year strata. So this highlights the fact that there are students who would like to go to a four-year school who, in the absence of getting aid, are going to end up in a two-year school. The control mean enrollment rate for four-year is only 83%. Which leaves enough room to increase four-year enrollment quite substantially. Another effect is to move students into Nebraska public schools relative to either non-enrollment or private enrollment. So there's some reduction in private enrollment and there's some reduction in out-of-state enrollment. Okay, so let's move on to the headline degree effects. So we were very excited to get these results last year. We had been waiting and waiting for the students to, you know, time to pass and for them to get to be old enough to finish their degrees. And you have to wait 6 years for that. Median time to completion at American public universities is 6 years. So it's not enough to look after 4. And initially we had seen either 0 or negative effects 4 years out. So that was a little surprising and worrying. But after 6 years, and this is for the 3 cohorts I mentioned, The control mean bachelor's degree completion is 64, and getting a Buffett award adds 8.1 percentage points to that. So that's about a 13-point gain. So that's a substantial effect. Some of it comes on account of a reduction in two-year degrees, 3.2 points. I'm not commenting on statistical significance, but you'll notice those are the standard errors in parentheses. These are reasonably precisely estimated effects. So we're pleased to have such a large sample. We don't have to worry too much about this just being noise, okay? So a huge gain, well, I don't know what huge, but substantial gain in BAs, some reduction in two-year degrees, but also a 5-point reduction in no degree, okay? So some people who wouldn't have gotten any kind of degree are now getting degrees, okay? I'll comment shortly on, should we think of that as a big effect or how should we think about that, okay? And we'll dig into that in a little bit, okay? Here are some initial interesting breakdowns. This is by target campus in the NU system. The NU system has 4 campuses, UNL, UNO, Kearney, and then there are state colleges. And one thing, and this is the point I mentioned before, 4 years out, the treatment effects were negative, so they're not significant. So those are treatment effects by target campus. 4 years out, they were negative, but not significant. And that has to do with the fact that students took more time to finish school, probably because they were relieved of financial considerations. But in the end, the degree effects are positive. So each number here is a degree treatment effect by target campus. So this is the Lincoln effect. So that is the most selective of the public campuses. And then there's a confidence band there, okay? The whiskers. And one thing that's interesting and turns out to be important to our subgroup story is that the students who said they want to go to Omaha, that is UNO, that's where we see the biggest gains. And I'm going to be able to explain that. At least we think we have an explanation for why that particular subgroup seemed to benefit so much. So let's move on and look at some of these subgroups. And the first thing I'll show you, and this is consistent with what I showed you by target campus, is a breakdown by whether you live in Omaha. So Nebraska, indeed, it's a large rural state, but it has a very large city as well on the eastern edge, Omaha. And many of the low-income minority applicants live in Omaha. Well, you see that so the format of these plots is how many people got a degree, and then this is control, the gray line, and this is treatment, and then the confidence interval around the treatment is the whiskers. So what you see is Omaha residents, a big effect, 6 years out, 13 points, much bigger than the treatment effect for people who don't live in Omaha. That's 5 points. It is actually statistically significant from 0, but it's more than 2.5 times as large. The treatment effect is more than 2.5 times as large on people who live in Omaha relative to non-Omaha. So that's something to explain. Okay. We also see a differential by race, though it's not as large. Treatment effect on non-whites is 9 points 6 years out. On whites, it's 7 points 6 years out. Not much difference, none to the level of precision reported in this figure by sex. Here is something that's relevant in the American context. Are you poor enough, is your family poor enough that you qualify for a Pell Grant, which is a means-tested federal grant program for post-secondary? And you see that people who are lower income, the treatment effect on them is 9 points versus 6 points for people who are not poor enough to qualify. And we also look by first generation. First generation in the post-secondary vernacular means you're the first in your family to go to college. So you have no parent with a BA. The treatment effects are larger, 9 points versus 5 points. When one parent has at least one parent has a BA. And here is also something important that connects with the Omaha story that I'll tell you in a few minutes. So the Buffett application says, where would you like to go if you get the money? And where will you likely go if you don't get the money? And so we learned from that, which applicants in the 4-year strata are likely to go to a 2-year school if they don't get the money. At least they say that. And sure enough, applicants who list a 2-year alternative, the treatment effect on them is quite large. And notice the control mean rate is only about 50% here, and then the treatment effect is 13. If you don't list a 2-year alternative, meaning you're going to go to a 4-year school anyway, You don't list a 2-year alternative. Okay, control means are higher and treatment effects are lower. So that's an interesting gradient for heterogeneous effects that we want to explore. The last thing I'll show you before getting into our explanation of this pattern is something we call the paradox of merit aid. So we look at treatment effects by what many people would see as measures of college readiness. So the first one of those is your ACT score, and we do a simple split. If you have below the state median ACT score, so that's why it's not an even split in terms of the sample, or are you above the state median ACT score? And you can see much larger treatment effects for lower scoring students. So that's an irony there, because most award programs tend to favor better prepared students, but the money actually benefits students who are less prepared more. And you see that in the split by ACT, and you see it in the split by high school GPA. So here we just split it by high school GPA in our sample. And if you have a low high school GPA, meaning below the median in the sample, the treatment effect 6 years out is a 12-point increase in BA completion on a control mean of about 4.4. And above median GPA kids, they're more college ready, but there's less of a treatment effect on them, only 4 points. So that's an interesting pattern. And again, there's a kind of a paradox there, or an irony. Aid programs that look at merit, and many do. The Buffett program is one. Also, the programs that I mentioned, like Hope and Adams, they tend to favor better prepared students. So Massachusetts Adams Scholarship, for example, you need to have a B average to qualify for that, a B average in high school. So there's a lot of those kind of rules out there in our post-secondary aid system. And they, according to our results, they tend to dilute the impact of awards, because students who are better prepared for college are likely to go to a 4-year school anyway. Okay, let's move on to our explanation for all those interesting subgroup patterns. We have a kind of a unifying story, and I've hinted at it already, but let me step back a second and just pick a couple of examples and then tell the story through these examples. Why is there such a big impact for students who say they want to go to the University of Nebraska's Omaha campus? The answer to that is most of those students, or relatively few of those students, are likely to go to a 4-year degree program in the absence of aid. So they need the aid to go to a 4-year program. They're likely to end up in a 2-year school or not go to college anyway, otherwise. Same thing for ACT. The groups with lower test scores, lower GPA, they have what we call in the paper a rare 4-year counterfactual. We also call that a 4-year destiny. The destiny is the distribution of a particular Y0, which is an outcome in the no treatment state. And in this case, it's not graduation, but it's the type of school that you go in the absence of treatment. People with low ACT scores have a rare 4-year destiny. That is, they're not likely to end up at a 4-year school. There's also a pattern of higher target compliance in the high impact group, where students who get the money are pushed into their target schools by getting the money and enroll elsewhere otherwise. So the paper details all that, but I'm going to give you a simple version of it that fits very nicely into an instrumental variables framework. Okay, so here is the hypothesis that we want to substantiate. The primary channel for degree gains is strong initial engagement with a 4-year program. And I'm going to go out on a limb, this is what the paper does, and say aid awards work exclusively through this 4-year channel with little or no effect on those who would otherwise go and complete the first year of a 4-year program successfully. Well, that's actually an exclusion restriction, where the offer of financial aid is an instrument for some measure of the success of a student on a 4-year campus in the first year. And we measure that success. It's natural, I think, to measure that success using the share of 4-year credits completed. How close did you come to the full load required to be seen as a student in good standing on a four-year campus. So let me give you some visual evidence on how the effect of awards on four-year credit completion in the first year explains ultimately everything about the degree impacts, okay? So here's a stylized version. This is two groups, actual data, but only two groups, okay? Students who target UNO, there's a big first stage effect on the share of initial four-year credits earned, and there's a big degree effect. You can read it over here. It's about 0.15, okay? Students who target UNL, there's a more modest effect on initial four-year credits earned because many of those students were going to go four-year anyway, so there can't be a treatment effect if you're going to do it anyway. And lo and behold, there's a lower degree effect. It's about 0.08, okay? The instrumental variable story says these effects explain these effects. Well, if you can draw a line through these points and it fits very well, but it's only 2 points. So that's not super impressive, okay? So now let's look at all of our subgroups. So that's all the subgroups: Omaha residents, UNO targeters, male, Pell eligible, not Pell eligible. Here are the people that said they want to go to two-year schools. We can add them back, okay? Well, this falls very close to that same line. The slope of this line is about 0.6. So it reconciles, and this is the beauty of IV. If I give you a mediator and it fits and it gives a coherent account of everything that's going on by way of treatment effects, then the effect of being offered aid on degree completion should be proportional to that first stage effect. And the coefficient of proportionality is exactly the instrumental variables estimate of the causal effect of first year credit completion on ultimate degree completion. And if I want to test this hypothesis, really what I'm testing is an exclusion restriction. The hypothesis can be tested by asking, how good is this line? How good is the fit? Asymptotically, if what I told you is true, that the only reason why awards affect degree completion is because they affect this mediator, then asymptotically I should fit that line perfectly, and any deviations from perfect fit should be explained by sampling variance. Well, there's a natural test for that. It's the Sargan over-identification test statistic. So we compute that. We also compute the instrumental variables estimates that go with this line. And it turns out to work out very well. So the line fits very well. We can't reject the hypothesis that that these points really fall on this line, subject to sampling variance. So that's interesting and substantive because it suggests that, you know, the aid doesn't really have the effect. You might think that there's an incentive effect. So, you know, for third year students, I'm encouraging them to do well. You might think that there's an insurance effect. We're not really finding that. We're finding that all of the effects work through this early engagement hypothesis. And that suggests maybe some interesting ideas about how to design programs to be more cost effective. Let me now turn very quickly to the cost benefit analysis of this program. There's quite a lot of detail on that in the paper. We don't really have time for it today, but I'll just give you the flavor of it and then I'll stop and take some questions. So there's a couple of ways to measure costs. So there's the funder cost. So how much money was spent on a treated applicant? So that's $34,000. Over the course of a college career, $34,000 was spent on a treated applicant. In the controls, that number is 0. Now, another way to measure cost is how much money do students spend on school? Because a lot of what the funder cost is a transfer. I may be increasing people's schooling, but I'm also giving them money. So another way to measure cost is to say, well, I just want to look at how much money was spent on education. Spending on education should go up because we're increasing education. So the difference between cost of attendance, which is a crude proxy for spending on education, the treated group spends about $33,000 on education, which is very close to funder cost. And then the control group spends 31. So the incremental spending from the point of view of society, netting out the transfers, is not 34,000, because that's just a gift. you know. The incremental spending to society is 34 minus 30.8. So that's much smaller, and that's a lower bar for cost benefit. What is benefit? Well, ultimately, we're following the students in this experiment. We'll ultimately learn what the effect is on their earnings, but that's going to take quite some years. In the meantime, we run some human capital regressions using the American Community Survey with people in Nebraska, and we estimate a wage equation, and we figure out, you know, what are the returns to schooling for people in Nebraska, and we use that to impute the earnings gain that's associated with that 8 percentage point increase in bachelor's degrees and all the other changes in schooling outcomes that I showed you at the outset. And so overall, the award effect on earnings is predicted in terms of PDV to be about $24,000, though it's lower than if you use a higher discount rate. So you can make your own decisions there. And then you see there's some interesting race and sex differences. Non-white men, for example, get a very large, almost $50,000 gain from the program. Okay, so that's a kind of point of comparison. And you can see that 34,000, you know, funder cost exceeds the funder cost. I'm going to skip this, which I used in a different talk. Funder cost exceeds the earnings gain, but actually in some subgroups, the program meets that test. So there are a few groups like Omaha residents and people who target UNO, it's almost true for them, and people with low ACT scores, where the earnings gain, that's what the dots here are, exceed the funder cost, that's what that upper line is. So even from the point of view of the funder, there are some high impact groups where the cost benefit analysis comes out positive. And then if we want to compare to the social cost, that of course is much smaller. That's just the incremental education spending. That's this lower number. And then the program easily beats that, you know, because the returns to schooling are so high and the marginal spending here is very low. Okay, so there's more on the paper on that. I don't think I'll take time to go into it today. It's quite interesting. We also experiment with a new idea in public finance that's being been developed by Nate Hendren and co-authors, the marginal value of public funds. It's a very simple way to compare this sort of program with other similar programs. And that also shows the Buffett program to be doing pretty well by that metric, though certainly a program that was more targeted on these high impact groups would generate a larger social return. So that's one of the lessons. Okay, let me wrap up for today and just give you the story so far. And it is ongoing because we're collecting other data. We're collecting also information on credit outcomes as well as earnings. The findings to date show that financial aid indeed creates degrees and increases schooling among four-year applicants. I didn't dwell on this, but it did not, the awards do not increase degrees for people targeting community colleges. And that's important in the American context because there's a lot of discussion about increased funding for community college students. So far, we haven't seen a big effect there, though we might down the road. Something else I didn't dwell on, but it's in the paper, is there's almost no difference in treatment effects between the COS group that doesn't get the learning community surveys and the services and the group that gets the learning communities. So the marginal impact of learning communities is basically not significantly different from zero. The aid to community college and state college applicants does increase their time in school. So it's an open question whether that's going to turn up in their earnings, even though it doesn't increase degrees. Then we have the story about subgroups and mediation. The BA gains in the four-year strata are largest where financial aid enables students to indeed enroll in the school they identified as a target, and for target compliers without a four-year counterfactual, using the idea of a local average treatment effect where the mediator there is target enrollment. The largest gains are for those applicants who are least college ready, and the BA gains, this is the visual IV picture that I showed you a few moments ago. The BA gains are proportional to and therefore explained by, at least as a hypothesis, we can't reject that they're explained by aid effects on initial four-year engagement. There's also the point that most financial aid here, as elsewhere, I believe, is a transfer. The bulk of the money flows to people who would have completed degrees anyway. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing, because it does create degrees, and it also relieves some people of their college debt that may be beneficial for their working lives or for their families. Even so, having said that, the provisional cost benefit analysis is positive for many groups and easily positive measured against social costs. Let me stop there. There's some other details there, but I think we can just move on to questions at this point.
Thank you so much. That was very inspiring, Josh. So I learned that the chat window is actually disabled for attendees. I don't know if someone from the production can help with that, but I have received lots of questions like from different parts, including my own WhatsApp in my phone. So I have.
Yeah, I think in the webinar you used the Q&A, but I only
but the Q&A is disabled, I think, for attendees. So there is a question whether you could comment on the implications for optimal design of grants given the results of first year explaining most of the results.
I would say it's provisional, but two possible things to think about. One is targeting to high impact subgroups. So you might, for example, it would certainly be defensible to abandon most merit considerations once you're above a very low bar. So once you're sort of eligible, broadly speaking, you might look only at need. If you want to increase degrees, need is a better screen than merit plus need, at least in the range that this program is targeted. The other thing, you might think about awards that are front loaded. That's right, because of our findings. So it's not necessarily the case that we've shown that you could abandon aid later on, because it might be the promise of aid throughout your college career that gets you to commit to that first year. But that's something we could explore in a future analysis and see whether that's necessary.
And given your answer of which is very intriguing about whether you want to target merit or need, because you did show that the results are quite substantial for those, for instance, with a lower GPA from high school, right? So, yeah. And that does suggest that the return is greater for those in higher need. I wonder if you have data for those who were not eligible to be in the bubble, for instance, because they had low scores at the beginning.
But we don't have, they're not treated right once, so we don't have.
Right. But
we don't have a research.
My question is whether you could, if there is enough continuity in this score that you use for the
do RD
or some sort of RD.
Yeah. I think we have a short paper in the PNP, the AR papers and proceedings. We messed around with that. There's not enough, density there. It doesn't work very well. And it turns out it's super sensitive to running variable control. So we were never very happy with the RD.
Okay. Yeah. There are more questions that I see here. One question from my colleague, Andrea from Rosario is, I wonder if the individuals who apply to this kind of program with low GPS and SAT might be high achievers, but they had to help support their families, so they might be different to regular individuals with low performance.
That's possible, and the splits I showed you are sort of one at a time. So they're not like conditional on family income, then split by GPA. But a multivariate analysis does preserve most of those patterns. So sort of conditional on family income, low GPA seems still to predict impact. But we thought we would simplify a bit and not do too much on that. We do have a sort of a summary version of all of those splits, which is multivariate. So this is it's something that many program evaluators are often attempted to do. Condition on the predicted probability of the outcome in the control group. So estimate the outcome propensity score, if you like, for degree completion among controls as a function of covariates, and then split on that. So that's multivariate. It puts all the predictors in, and we clearly see that those who are based on covariates not likely to finish a BA or less likely, the impact is increasing in being less likely to finish a degree as predicted by covariates.
Right. And many of those covariates that you use to split the sample and look at heterogeneous effects were not stratified upon, right? So these
not at the outset. Some were.
Yeah, some like the type of college, but
Target.
for those that were not stratified, how should we think about those differential effects?
Well, then you might worry a little bit that we're snooping around and there's lots of them and so on and so forth. And that's a legit worry. So there is a dramatic effect by target campus, and that's built into the design. Did you want to go 4 versus 2, and then within the 4, the different campuses? And that pattern is basically replicated by the other covariates. So the covariates that we didn't stratify on are consistent with what we know about UNO. So or the different targets. So I can't sort of fully put your mind at rest there, Juan, but it does seem like it's a strong effect. It's highly consistent. It's not really also, I think I worry most about snooping for covariate effects when the effects are marginal,
Yeah.
And so, you ran an experiment and this was the program of your dream and you dedicated your life to designing it. You're reluctant to accept the fact that it doesn't do anything. So you hunt around for subgroups and eventually you'll find one where, you can get a T a little bit over 2. So that isn't really the pattern here. It's fairly cut and dried.
Great. So we have 5 more minutes before you have to go. I will just go ahead and read some other questions that I've gotten. Mm-hmm. So Hugo Ñopo asked whether it's possible for students to switch from 2-year programs to 4-year programs during the 6-year time frame.
They could. Not very many people do, but they can. Then they would qualify for more aid.
Perfect. I have some other questions. In general, what do we know if those that are more sensitive to merit-oriented, whether we know if those that are more sensitive to merit-oriented are discouraged to receive financial support based on ideology, like farmers or some religious beliefs, which seems to be common in the context, at least in that state.
No, we don't have any information about those sort of things.
Okay. I have another question. Given the paradox on who benefits more, would it be more socially profitable to invert the selection criteria and scores? In other words, could helping out the underachievers be an overall better way to use the scarce resources?
Well, the way I think about it is you might want to get rid of the merit criteria, but you probably don't want to reward lack of merit. So, I think it would be politically difficult and probably not a great idea to have a financial aid program which the rules are kind of explicitly like, well, what you really need to get our money is a low ACT score. That seems to have bad incentives, and the general equilibrium effects of that will not be very good. But, we could certainly moderate or even eliminate the merit criteria, and I think the way to do that would be to have a very low threshold, which the overall eligibility kind of imposes that. So there is a floor to the eligibility for the program. And if you're below that floor, you're not really going to end up in our data because you won't be, you'll be told that you shouldn't apply.
Right.
But it's a pretty low It's a pretty low bar. It's very different from a lot of scholarship money, which focuses on the high end. You know, the most well-known version of that is probably national merit scholarships. Many American college students compete for national merit. That's based on their PSAT scores. And that money is rewarding an elite, relatively elite, high-achieving group. And I haven't studied that program, but my guess is that those awards have no effect on college completion. The people who are kind of close to the cutoff there, they're going to finish their BAs either way.
And probably this is going to be the last question because I want to, I gave you my word that we're going to end at 5:30. Yes. So Matilde Machado actually is reminding us that there was another plenary session this Wednesday by Ted Miguel. Mm-hmm. And he's looking at this cash transfer program in Kenya. And the question that they ask in this paper is whether there are higher returns for those that are more in need, or actually what they do is that they have this sort of machine learning strategy, which I know that you don't like so much, but they have this machine learning strategy to compute, given the covariates, given a bunch of observables who are going to benefit the most from the cash transfer. So they can actually, in terms of market design, at least they can actually learn who are going to be those that are most benefited from these sort of programs. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question of Matilde is whether it would be possible to do this kind of exercise and differentiate the returns according to observe.
Well, you could do that, but our covariates are not that high dimensional. You know, so machine learning is wasted on us, I would say. The covariates are fairly, it's true that the ACT score is potentially continuous, but I think it's straightforward to think of low dimensional models. We do that. So we estimate a kind of a propensity score for Y0. And we do what Alberto Abadi and co-authors call endogenous stratification. We look at predicted outcomes. But you know, I'm skeptical, though I don't think we've tried that analysis would be much enriched by machine learning because, you know, we have a dozen covariates and we're not really that interested in higher order interactions anyway.
Right. So I would like to apologize to those that ask questions that I didn't manage to ask live. Sorry for that. But please join me in thanking Josh Angrist for this inspiring talk. Thank you so much, Josh, for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for inviting me. And
I know that you agreed beforehand, but you must be extremely busy, especially
but I have to ask you what's next in my life.
You should. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I hope to see you in person soon.
You too. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for connecting to this session. And this is the conference comes to an end with this. Thank you for sticking by and being a complier for this late session.
Very good. Bye-bye.
Bye.